What if one decision behind the scenes just triggered one of the messiest situations in hip-hop right now, and somehow pulled in names that were never supposed to be part of the same conversation? Because what started as a simple challenge between T.I. and 50 Cent has now turned into something much bigger, involving personal tension, public pressure, and even unexpected links to one of the most controversial document releases in recent years. And the reason people are paying so much attention to this is not just because of what happened, but because of what might happen next. At first, this looked like a normal rap situation, something we have seen many times before, where one artist challenges another, things get a little tense, and then either it turns into music or it fades away. But this situation didn't follow that path. The deeper you look into how everything unfolded, the more it starts to feel like this was never just about music in the first place. This is about perception, about influence, and about who really controls the narrative when things start to escalate publicly. To understand how all of this started, you have to go back to the Versus idea. T.I. had been pushing for a battle with 50 Cent for years, and this wasn't something he mentioned casually once or twice. He kept bringing it up in interviews, on podcasts, and across social media, making it clear that he wanted to go head-to-head with 50 in a 20-song format. From a fan perspective, it made sense, because both artists have strong catalogs and long histories in the culture, and a matchup like that would definitely get attention. But from the very beginning, 50 Cent never treated the idea seriously. When T.I. first challenged him publicly back in 2020, 50 responded with humor, dismissing the idea and making it clear that he didn't see it as something worth his time. That reaction wasn't random, it showed a difference in mindset. T.I. was chasing a moment that he believed could elevate the conversation, while 50 Cent was already in a position where he didn't feel the need to prove anything through a format like that. And even though the idea never fully went away, it also never became real. I kept pushing, and 50 kept ignoring. For a while, things stayed quiet, and it seemed like the situation was over before it even began. But then in 2026, everything came back at once. T.I. started promoting what he described as his final album, and suddenly the Versus conversation returned, but this time it came with a completely different energy. Instead of simply suggesting the idea, T.I. began saying publicly that 50 Cent had already agreed to the battle behind the scenes. According to T.I., there had been private conversations where everything was discussed, and the only reason it didn't happen was because 50 Cent backed out once the idea became public. Now, this is where things started to shift, because instead of keeping that information private, T.I. repeated it across multiple platforms. He talked about it in interviews, podcasts, and online, creating a narrative that 50 was acting differently in public than he was in private. And in hip-hop, that kind of move is risky. Exposing private conversations can change how people see the situation, but it also almost guarantees a response. Then T.I. went one step further and questioned 50 Cent's character publicly, and that was the moment everything crossed the line from promotion into personal tension. Once things became personal, the entire situation changed. 50 Cent didn't respond by explaining his side or trying to calm things down. Instead, he escalated it. He took the situation to social media, posting content that mocked T.I. and pushed the situation further. That response triggered a chain reaction, because now T.I. had to respond, and once both sides are actively engaging, things start to move very quickly. Diss tracks began to appear, the tone became more aggressive, and the situation stopped being about a potential Versus battle and started becoming a full conflict. Then other voices entered the situation, including members of T.I.'s family. And once that happens, it becomes even harder to control where things go next, because now the situation is no longer shaped by just two artists. It becomes something bigger, something that involves multiple perspectives, reactions, and emotional responses. And once it reaches that level, it is almost impossible to bring it back to a neutral point. At this stage, most people expected the conflict to continue through music, because that is how rap beefs usually evolve. But 50 Cent introduced something different, something that changed the entire dynamic. He hinted at using documentaries as a way to respond, and that was a major shift, because a documentary is not the same as a diss track. A song might trend for a few days, but a documentary can influence how people see a situation for much longer. It can reach a wider audience, present information in a structured way, and create a narrative that stays in people's minds. And 50 Cent has already shown that he understands how to use that format effectively. So when he hinted at doing something similar in this situation, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a calculated move, something designed to shift the entire conversation away from music and into something much more impactful. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't become more complicated, another name entered the conversation: Jay-Z. At first, it didn't seem serious. It looked like the kind of trolling that 50 Cent is known for, something that would come and go quickly. But then something happened that changed everything: the release of the Epstein files. This was a massive collection of documents, and within that release, Jay-Z's name appeared in an unverified tip. Now, this detail is extremely important because there is no confirmed evidence linking him to wrongdoing, no verified involvement, and no official accusations. But in today's media environment, once a name appears, that alone is enough to start a conversation. And once that conversation starts, it spreads quickly. 50 Cent reacted almost immediately, referencing the situation and once again hinting at the idea of turning it into content. And just like that, Jay-Z became part of the narrative, even though he was never directly involved in the original conflict. When you step back and look at everything together, it becomes clear that this is not just a random series of events. This is a situation where multiple narratives are overlapping at the same time, and where one person is consistently placing themselves at the center of the conversation. Because in today's industry, controlling attention often matters more than controlling facts. And right now, the biggest question is not what already happened, but what happens next. Because if this situation continues to escalate, it could move far beyond a typical rap conflict and turn into something that affects reputations, perception, and influence on a much larger scale. And if that happens, this won't just be about music anymore. It will be about control and who has the ability to shape what people believe before the full story is even understood. One thing that makes this situation even more interesting is that the tension between 50 Cent and Jay-Z didn't just start recently. It goes back years, and understanding that history helps explain why everything happening right now feels much bigger than just one situation. Back in the early stages of 50 Cent's career, he built a lot of attention by calling out major names in the industry. One of those names was Jay-Z. At that time, it wasn't unusual for artists to take shots at each other, but what made it different was how strategic 50 was with it. He understood that mentioning the biggest names would automatically bring attention to him. As both of them became more established, their relationship never really turned into a direct, consistent feud, but it also never became friendly. It stayed somewhere in between, where there was always tension, always competition, but also moments where they would collaborate, if it made sense from a business perspective. That kind of relationship is rare, because it is not based on trust or loyalty. It is based on timing and opportunity. And over the years, both of them have shown that they understand how to move in that kind of environment. There were moments where they appeared on the same side, working on projects or appearing together in certain contexts, but even then, it never felt like a genuine connection. It felt like two people who understood each other's value, but didn't necessarily see each other as allies. That's why when 50 Cent brings Jay-Z into the conversation now, it doesn't feel random. It feels like something that has been building over time. Because when you have that kind of history, even small actions can carry a lot more meaning. Another important detail is how both of them approach power in the industry. 50 Cent has always been very public with his moves. He uses social media, he speaks directly to the audience, and he keeps himself in the center of attention. Jay-Z, on the other hand, operates very differently. He focuses on business, on influence behind the scenes, and on building long-term control rather than short-term attention. So when those two approaches collide, it creates a completely different type of dynamic. It's not just about who says more or who responds faster. It's about who controls the situation in a deeper way. And that's exactly why this current situation feels unpredictable. Because you have one person who is actively pushing the narrative forward and another who is choosing not to engage publicly at all. And when that happens, the outcome becomes much harder to predict. Because sometimes the person who says less is actually doing more behind the scenes. And this is where things get even more interesting, because situations like this don't just disappear overnight. They evolve, they grow, and sometimes they turn into something much bigger than anyone expected at the beginning. Right now, everything is still unfolding. There are no clear answers, no final outcomes, and no confirmation about what will actually happen next. But what makes this situation so unpredictable is the fact that all the key players involved move completely differently. On one side, you have someone who is willing to push things publicly, say what he wants, and keep the pressure on at all times. On the other side, you have someone who responds strategically, using different tools, different platforms, and a completely different approach to control how the story develops. And then there is the third side, where silence becomes part of the strategy, where not responding at all can sometimes create even more attention than saying something. And when you combine all of those elements together, you get a situation where anything can happen. Because if this continues to escalate, it won't just stay in the world of music. It will move into something much bigger, something that affects how people see these artists, how their names are associated with certain narratives, and how their influence is perceived going forward. And the biggest question right now is not what has already happened, but what is about to happen next. Will this situation turn into something real, with actual projects and real consequences? Or will it remain what it is right now, a mix of tension, speculation, and carefully controlled attention? Because if there is one thing that is clear, it is that this is no longer just entertainment. This is a situation where perception matters more than facts, where attention drives everything, and where the person controlling the narrative often ends up controlling the outcome. And right now, all eyes are on what happens next. So let me know what you think. Do you think this situation is actually going to escalate into something bigger, or is this all just strategy and timing? And if you want to see more breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe, because this story is still developing and there is a lot more that could happen next.